Yeah, so welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Beyond the Playbook podcast. And we're back for another episode with Philippe O'Connor, who's been very gracious with his time, like making time amongst his many commitments to give us a little bit of a snippet into what's going on in the World Cup, especially in the Canadian side of the border. And yeah, just before we begin, how are you doing, and how's it been? I think close to 2 weeks now in Canada, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think it's just over 2 weeks since I arrived here, Ashish. And it's kind of like once the game started, it's kind of like being put in a tumble dryer. And just, like the whole time there's something happening. And you just go from one thing to the next thing. So as we're speaking now, we just had Canada play the game yesterday against Switzerland. And today, 24 hours afterwards, we have the match day -1 press conferences for New Zealand against Belgium. And they're playing tomorrow. And then we're into the knockout round. And then, of course, I'll be covering Sweden, where I live, and Norway, where I've been to cover a lot of football before, and all the other things that come up around, with news and business and politics and that kind of thing. So, but I can't complain. Don't have any sympathy for me whatsoever, because it's just fantastic to have the privilege to be here at this tournament, but also to be involved in it and to report on it and to tell all the great stories that are coming out of it.
Of course, Philip. It's like as you like. Of course, there's the fatigue of all the games as well, but also there's that excitement as well when you're watching the game. Like I've tried to catch. I mean, at least the humanly possible hours or the more humane hours in India. I've tried to catch a lot of those games, and the other games I've watched on the replays. But I'm pretty sure while you're on the ground, it's like a different feeling altogether. Like since we last spoke as well, two Canada home games have played, and both were contrasting. So I just wanted to get your feelings to see how it was in the stadium for both the games. Especially the first game was a little more of a emotionally drawn game with sadly Ismail Kone suffering that very devastating injury. Like I'm not going to blame Madibo for that. Little bit of an unfortunate injury, but yeah, it was a little bit of a like you could hear the snap of the leg as it was
Yep.
very uh, uh,
Yeah. It
bad. Yeah.
wasn't. It wasn't very pleasant. Just that particular incident wasn't very pleasant, and you knew straight away that it was bad because his studs were caught in the turf when
Mm.
Madibo caught him a little bit, and it's just one of those things that happens in football. Sometimes the ACL, the upper body twist, and then this time it wasn't. It was down below the ankle, kind of thing, or around the ankle, and that was very sad. But it was like, as you say, those two games were very interesting from a Canadian perspective, because if we zoom out a little bit about what this World Cup is about, in part, not in full, but in part, they're trying to grow the game in North America. They're trying to grow the game in Canada and in the US. And Canadian football, soccer in Canada has always been sort of, very much second place to things like hockey. Like ice hockey is just, it's like a religion here. It's absolutely huge. So this opportunity to have a home World Cup and to play home games in Vancouver has been an absolutely huge thing. So they played the first game in Toronto. They got a draw against Bosnia. Kyle Larin scored for Canada, but they were still looking for their first ever victory in a World Cup game, or any World Cup game at all. And they got it, and they absolutely hammered Qatar and that kind of thing. And it was a great moment for people around here in Vancouver. There are two kinds of people here, Ashish, right? One is the kind of person who tells you, we love soccer, this is a soccer city. And the other is the kind of people who goes, I don't even know what soccer means, right? And these two communities, what you need for the first community, the people who love soccer, is they need the buy-in of the other people who don't necessarily like it, who may not necessarily ever buy a ticket or watch a Whitecaps game, or a Canada game, or that kind of thing. But they need to know that these other people think that they are, this is something to be counted upon. This is something that's important in Canadian culture. So that 6-0 victory over Qatar, their first ever in a World Cup, it was very historic. The players were very euphoric. Jesse Marsh was being Jesse Marsh about the whole thing. That was a fantastic experience for the Canadian people. But then, and this was the problem, right? Because I'm too old and I've been around too long now not to be cynical. So I'm sitting there
Mm.
going, okay, Bosnia ranked somewhere down around 60 in the world. Qatar, I think, were ranked somewhere around 56 in the world, right? So a draw against one of those teams and beating the other, that's really good, right? Switzerland are a different kettle of fish entirely.
Mm.
And they met them. I think Switzerland ranked around 10, 12, 13 in the world or something
Yeah.
like that. And you could really see that yesterday. And that was so unfortunate because one thing, okay, Coney, good player, missing out. Alfonso Davis obviously probably would have made a little bit of a difference yesterday if he
Even
was fit.
Bombito as well, right? The center back.
Exactly, so you got a lot of key players missing and that kind of thing. But the gulfing class between the Swiss, even when that goal was scored, when Canada made it 2-1, was it Promise David made it 2-1,
Yeah,
but an absolutely
beautiful goal.
fantastic finish. yeah, that very few people would have thought of even capable of when you've seen him play football before. But it was an incredible finish altogether. But even at 2-1, I was looking at that Swiss team and Granit Xhaka, and they weren't one bit bothered. They did not for 1 second believe that Canada were going to get the draw. And if Canada had got the draw, then they would have stayed here in Vancouver. And this is the big, big miss for Canada. It's like yesterday, it's that kind of meme, like, you had one job, what Roy Keane always likes to say, that's your job, was to get a point out of that game and stay here in Vancouver. And now they're not staying in Vancouver. The Swiss will stay here for their last 32 game. If they win that, they'll play their last 16 game here. Well, Canada have gone on the road and they're going to be down in Los Angeles now against South Africa. And if they beat South Africa, God only knows where they'll wind up. So it's a bit sad from that perspective. But I think its mission sort of partially accomplished here. I think people here, when they saw the march, the fan march to the game yesterday was an amazing visual spectacle. People walking along, flares and music and chants and drumming and that kind of thing. And it really brought home to people in Vancouver who maybe aren't soccer fans that there's a lot of soccer loving people in this city. Now, it would help if their team would go out on the field and sort of beat a team, but I think it was too tall an order yesterday. And to be honest, I don't know if Jesse Marsh is an okay soccer coach, but I don't know if he's the kind of guy who, if you're looking to beat teams that are higher ranked than you, I don't think Jesse Marsh is the man to do it, because he does give this great sort of impression that he knows what he's talking about. But he went on and on about Alfonso Davis. Yeah, Alfonso Davis is fit. Alfonso Davis wasn't fit. And he told us after the game that he wasn't fit. So why are you saying he is? Because it's not like the Swiss were sitting there going, okay, let's game plan our entire game for Alfonso Davis coming off the bench in the 70th minute. They don't care. Like you have one good player to deal with. They're not going to change what they're doing for that. So that struck me as, frankly, it was idiotic the way they went on around Alfonso Davis. But they've never been in this position before. They've never hosted a men's World Cup. Jesse Marsh has never been in the position where he's about to take a team out of a group stage in a World Cup in the way that he would do with a host nation in Canada. So maybe these are learning things. But I do think that, it has been very successful from that point of view for Canada that they made it out of the group stage, having never done so before. But it could have been so much more than what it is.
Yeah, I think it's about like expectations as well, right? Like it's about how you're able to temper the expectations as well. And I think out of the three host nations as well, they were, I mean, in terms of the development of soccer or football for the matter in their respective countries, Canada was lagging behind the US and Mexico for that. So I think from that perspective, like I think the biggest win for them would have been to get out of the group, at least coming in second, if not first. And I think, see, I mean, even I realistically knew that there was no chance that they had against Switzerland. Like, there's like a gulf in class, right? Like, Switzerland have that. In fact, like out of the last seven tournaments, is the sixth time they've gotten past the group stage into the knockout. So that there'll always be that gulf of experience, and there are steps also to every process. So I think that's where Canada's a little bit lacking, and I think, of course, missing out on Alfonso Davis and that I think Ismail Kone has been their player of the tournament up until he got injured. Like he was class. He was like really good in the Bosnia game, and at least when he was there in the Qatar game as well. And of course, losing their centre back is a big miss. So hopefully, like in future tournaments, they will qualify. So that this will be a good experience for them. But yeah, like you win some, you lose some at the end of the day, I feel. And I think facing South Africa, and I think South Africa have like they've risen up from the dead out of nowhere. They will be a tough out, but I wouldn't say they would be too sad about meeting South Africa. I think like getting into the last 16 would be a great result for Canadian football. I think that's what I would say, honestly.
I think it is, but I think they kind of need to look at the bigger picture as well because they
Mm,
kind of focus everything on, it's amazing that the Canadian camp is almost paranoid in the way that they deal with the press. Like
mm,
they will come out there, and you go to the training ground and they might have, they'll put up two players for interview and the guys might speak for 4 or 5 minutes. They have a press officer who walks through the mix zone with the players. And are these people not adults? Are they not capable of having a conversation with a journalist without having somebody like some sort of chaperone? And I think they've concentrated too much, Ashish, on things like that, rather than concentrating on the things that they can control, right?
mm,
So, and if you're so worried about the image that you're giving a Canadian soccer, because personally, I don't think that they've handled things very well as a team. I think that they've come
mm.
across as being scared and that they're trying to control the narratives around their team and that kind of thing. And that's great. But the best way to control the narrative is to win games on the pitch. And if you
Hmm.
win games on the pitch, you can say whatever the hell you like, and nobody else can sort of, say, oh, what about this, what about that? None of that matters if you win the games and you stay here in Vancouver. So I think they're going to come in for a lot of criticism, and that in turn, I think that's affecting the legacy that they're going to have. Because if people look at
Hmm.
these guys and go, oh, they're divas, or they don't care, or they think they're smarter than they are by pretending that Alfonso Davis is fit, and these people, they're not going to enjoy that kind of thing. Whereas if the team
Yeah.
goes out there, gives its all, if they gave their all and lost honestly to Switzerland, that's fine. Nobody cares about that. But it's when you try this cloak and dagger stuff, and it really is like, you're overcomplicating stuff. And if you endear yourself, we've seen so many times in the past that, a smaller nation coming to a tournament that is just honest and that goes about its business in the right way and that tries, because you can't ask for anything more than somebody's best. And we get onto this later on when we're talking about who my favorite outsider of the tournament is. I'll tell you about that then, because these are the kind of people who are going, okay, we're here, we're just going to make the most of it, instead of being here and go, oh, what's the cleverest thing we can do here? How can we come out of
Yeah.
this looking the best? I'll tell you how you do that. You win games.
Yeah. I think like Jesse Marsh also, speaking to your point you said about Jesse Marsh, I think he's not everyone's cup of tea. I think there is this cliche which we use for players, right? If he's on your team, if a particular player is on your team, you would love him for your team, but if he's on the opposition, you would hate him with your guts. And I think he's something like that. But also, like, I don't know, like a little bit is like I find it a little bit cringy, all the stuff which he does and him belting out the Canadian anthem and all the stuff which he said about the US team and how they don't, sing the national anthem and all that stuff. I did find that a little bit, off-putting. But I don't know, like I can't help but, he has bought into it. Like, I mean, he's not treated this as like, a second choice, or at least he's come with it with some commitment. I don't know, maybe it's you may be coming from it from a different angle, but I don't know. It seems like he has shown a commitment to like at least trying to put a Canadian football or soccer for that matter in a better light. I don't know. Maybe it's a different
Yeah,
perspective.
no, he absolutely has. But what Jesse Marsh has failed to remember is that this is not about Jesse Marsh. This is
Hmm.
about Canadian football. And
Correct. Yeah.
okay, you're a good guy. You could sit there at a press conference and you could say clever things and that kind of thing. There was a great instance there when Ismail was actually on the podium with Jesse ahead of the Qatar game, and there was a great incident. You can find this online. It's brilliant altogether.
Hmm.
So a friend of mine, Harji Johal, who was she asked the question. She lives here in Vancouver. Was born in, or she was I think she was born in India somewhere, but she was raised here in Vancouver, and she was like talking about how she was asking about playing in Vancouver and the grass pitch and the roof being closed and this kind of thing. And Jesse Marsh was saying, oh, you should ask Ishmael. He's the one going to be playing here, or he was at the game. The previous game was held here. And her being her said, I'm asking you. You're the coach. And Jesse took that and he saw that as a sort of a comedic moment and he sort of lived in it as if it was Saturday Night Live. It's not Saturday Night Live. You're playing Qatar tomorrow, okay? So do the serious thing, right? You don't
Hmm.
have to be front row center. What you're doing here is you're not representing Jesse Marsh. You're representing Canadian football. So to go out
Hmm.
there and to lie about the status of Alfonso Davis on behalf of Canadian football is
Yes.
not a good look. And I
Yeah.
think really, and I think he's trying to do his best. But again, I think they need to sit down and think about the broader perspective here of who are
Yeah.
we, what do we want to communicate to the world, and I don't think Canada have done a great job of that, because the people you meet on the street here, Ashish, they are 100% in that boat that you're talking about. He is their team. They want to believe everything he says and they want to get in behind him and that kind of thing,
Yeah.
and they will ignore an awful lot of the cringe and the running up and down the sideline and pumping his fist and all this stuff. He
Yeah.
was asked about that, and he was going, oh, we shouldn't even be talking about these mean things. Well, don't do them. Don't, sort of give this fuel to the fire kind of thing. So, but I do think on the whole, it's going to be a positive thing. I think the fact that the World Cup came to Vancouver and people have seen it, and
Hmm.
now they will see, other teams coming in here. Switzerland will be here for another couple of days, and the Swiss have always got great fans. I mean, we're only short of getting Scotland up here. That would have been magnificent after what they did in Boston. So, but I do think that it is changing the perspective. But I think it could have done so much more if the Canadians had been able to stay here for two more
Of
games.
course, of course. Okay, now a little bit of look ahead against their prospective game against South Africa. How do you think they will do? Do you think they will win? And what do you think about that particular South African outfit?
Well, I think I got the impression yesterday that the Canadians are very down about not being here in Vancouver because, like I said, you had one job. If you had just got a draw against Switzerland yesterday,
Mm,
you would have been playing two games in Vancouver. And they were sort of very depressed slash disappointed about not making that. There was a lot of, Kyle Larin walked through the mix on past me and he looked really, really down in the mouth about it.
mm,
That, and of course, Jesse Marsh is saying, oh, well, it is what it is. We're into the knockout round. This is great. Let's
yeah,
go. Yeah, but it could have been so much better.
of course, yeah.
I think that South Africa are the kind of technically capable team who have that little pinch of chaos that a lot of great African teams bring to a tournament. That they may not give you the answer you were expecting, but it's more than enough to win a game at any particular time. And Canada struggle against that because their players are sort of, they're technically limited compared to South Africans. They would be technically limited. Like yesterday, we saw an awful lot of when the Swiss would put in a high ball, or when the Swiss would play us have a longer pass or whatever, and the Canadians had a chance to clear. They never looked for a player to knock the ball down to. They just looked to get rid of it, and they would just give position back to Switzerland, and Switzerland would have effectively moved up the pitch. It was actually like kicking for possession in rugby, which is a weird thing to say, but that was the way that the Swiss, because the Swiss knew they were just going to give the ball back to them anyway, or that the Canadian team would get on the ball. They would lose it after 2 or 3 passes, and the Swiss would win the ball in a much more advantageous position. And Canada were there, and they were doing their best, but they're just. And South Africa will look at that and go, "Look, let's just go with these guys, right? Because even if we lose the ball, if you lose the ball against Norway, there's a very good chance it's going to wind up in the back of the net, right?
Yeah.
But if you lose the ball against Canada, there's what's the worst that can happen kind of thing. As I say, Kyle Larin yesterday on the breaks and terrible finishes altogether. You had Jonathan Davis yesterday, not great finishes there either. So I think that South Africa will look at that and go, hey, there's no pressure on us. You're dealing with one of the host nations. And really for Canada now, if Canada want to finish this off on a very positive note, they have to win one more game, right?
Correct, yeah.
Losing the next game is that to me is not, you haven't passed the test here. You need to win, you need to get out of your
Yeah.
group, and you need to win one more game. It's around the 32. It's like a second group stage, basically.
Yeah.
And if they don't do that, so the pressure to me is all on Canada. South Africa started really badly, did as South Africa have a tendency to do. They pulled it out of the fire. And now they're playing with house money, so now
Yeah.
they can get in there, they can be relaxed, and they can just play their football. And I think that's a very dangerous thing for Jesse Marsh and the Canadians.
Yeah, like to draw from WWE, like South Africa, like Undertaker, if I'm not wrong, like they just rose,
Exactly.
they just rose up
Uh,
from the dead suddenly. Uh,
and now, once they've done that once, they know they can do it again. This is why they're so
exactly.
entertaining to watch.
And yeah, and they were like dead in the water against the Czechs as well, right? They were losing, and then they just got that little bit of a dodgy penalty, if you were to ask me. A little bit, I don't think that penalty was little warranted. The arm was close to the body, and I don't
Yeah.
think such penalty should be given. But they anyways got it, converted it, kept themselves alive, and again, they made South Korea, who were like, I mean, I felt good about South Korea after the game they played against Czech Republic, and they made them look like dunces. Like, I mean, I was like shocked actually. Like they actually controlled that game from minute 1 to 90, and I think I think a lot of people will be pitting Canada to win, but I think South Africa have a little bit of a chance, especially if it goes like the longer the game stretches. I think it will be in their favor, I guess.
Well, this is the thing as well, because South Africa now, having to face South Africa, I think on the 28th of June for Canada. If they had
Ooh,
stayed here in Vancouver, they would have played on the 2nd of June. So they don't have a whole lot of time to recover from what was a physically very tough challenge yesterday.
wow,
They chased the Swiss. Yeah,
that's a
that's a quick
large gap.
turnaround right there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So that in terms of rest and restitution, that kind of thing. And some of the Canadian players looked a bit tired to me as well. Even
mm,
after the game when they've been through the showers and that kind of thing. And I think that all of these factors, if you just won your game against Switzerland, gotten a draw against Switzerland, well, then you were in a good
yeah,
place for that. So all of these things, I think, speak against Canada beating South Africa there. But we'll see what happens. I mean,
we'll see
you
what
never
happens.
know. Like at least they have another few days now to look at Alfonso Davis' hamstring and see if he can play any part in the game whatsoever. Not that I believe Jesse Marsh at this stage. I wouldn't believe a word out of the man's mouth when he talks about players' fitness. But it will be good to see. And as I say, that would be winning for them. Then they're done. Whatever happens after that doesn't make any difference.
Yeah,
That would just be the big thing. But I think they really need to win that game to sort of really cement the legacy of this World Cup for Canada.
definitely. I think Fonzie has to play. I think he is that X factor player for them, and Alfonso Davis has to play. So let's see. Like we will get to know in 3 days' time. Like hope, like
Yeah.
4 days, I would say over here. But yeah, like a big turnaround. Hopefully, they do well to secure at least the lingering legacy of Canadian football for the future. So to move on to stuff closer to your backyard, the Scandinavian nations, and like Sweden, like what can you say? Like I mean, they're the first team in history to win a game 5-1 and to lose the second game 5-1. And I mean, like I mean, the stage is yours. What you can just be unfiltered. What do you think?
It's absolutely perfect, Ashish, because this is exactly who they are. You never know what you're going to get with them at the moment. They can come out and they can be brilliant against Tunisia. They can score 5 goals, loads of different players getting on the score sheet, and then they can come out against the Netherlands and absolutely collapse. And what I found fascinating about that game was that the first three goals that the Netherlands scored were almost exactly the same. So they
Hmm.
put the ball in between the back line and the goalkeeper, and
Correct.
Robbie or Gakpo or whoever was just on there to poke the ball into the back of the net.
Robbie was
And
brilliant.
that's okay. He was fantastic. But then, and again, like I love to give players credit, especially strikers as a former myself. I love to give, but what expect them to do anything different once
Mm.
they playing that ball in there. And the Swedes, I mean, come on, guys. When are we gonna? When's this gonna click there? The third time, you're just going, okay, I'll give up. There's no telling these guys. And it comes from like it was an obvious tactic from the Dutch to say, okay, if we can open that little bit of space between our goalkeeper Christopher Nordfeldt here and the back line here, just put the ball in there and we'll see because our strikers will run onto it. They'll be in the right place and that kind of thing. And the fact that the Swedes, like Isak Hien, who's the captain of Sweden, centre back, he actually grew up. He started playing football on the pitch at the end of my street, actually, right? So this is a guy I've known since he
Wow.
was like, yay high kind of thing.
Wow.
And I'm looking at him defending, and I can't remember if it was the first or second goal, but he has Robbie behind him, and he's looking at the balls over here on the left wing. And he's going, okay, and then he just completely forgets that the guy's behind him. Now, Robbie's not going to disappear. He's not going to stop at the penalty spot and just stand there and wait, kind of thing. And then the ball comes in, and Isak has two choices. And like I say, I love the kid. I don't want to be critical of him, but you have two things you can do there. You can either play the ball, or you
Mm.
can stop him from playing the ball.
Yeah.
And he did neither. And that then happened, that spread through the Swedish defence. And then the passivity for the final two goals, there was one by Gakpo, and then there was Crescencio scored the other one. Like, they were exactly the same. Ball caught that in the pocket of space to the left, cut inside, shoot with your right foot. I was like, what is this? Like, to have that happen twice as well, it's just very poor individual defending as people switched off. But that's who Sweden are. They have absolutely brilliant attacking players at the moment. Anthony Elanga came off the bench, scored an absolutely tremendous goal. But I don't know if this is fixable. So they're going to be playing Japan shortly after we speak here, and anything could happen in that match. Like anything could happen. Japan are a very, very good team, and if they click and they have things tactically right, and I have no reason to believe they won't, they could absolutely murder Sweden as well. Like to the point where their goal difference actually prevents them from getting to the next round. So it really is. It's going to take a little while. I think Graham Potter is a very clever coach. I think he can solve these problems, but I think he needs more time on the training ground to condition these players mentally to say, if this is happening, this is your responsibility.
Mm.
Simplified a lot of things from the time of John Dalton, but like I don't know if he's simplified enough just yet.
I think you could see a little bit of an improvement as well, right? Right after the first quarter, so to speak, after the first hydration break, uh, like Graham Potter actually, like he made some changes and Sweden started playing well in the second half of the first half, so to speak. Like they were much, much better, more improved. They were getting a lot more shots on target. A little bit unlucky with how Verbruggen was playing, but yeah, like I do feel like a little bit of a Graham Potter. He needs more time on the pitch, but yeah, like the way they collapsed was a little. It didn't sit right with me. Like I think after a point, right? If you've conceded three goals, I think it's all about damage limitation, especially with how the group stage is. And I don't think they were canny or they were a little naive. I felt with that.
Well, I think that comes down to the fact that they can't, like, you're talking about making decisions at very high tempo in a very high
Mm.
pressure situation. And I think that's where the Swedes are lacking. And what you need then, international football is completely different from club football. There are people who would
Yeah.
argue that they say, I don't think they're even the same game, right? When
Mm.
you bring people together and you say you have a short space of time, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks to prepare them, and then you need to get these kids, and you really need to be very clear about how you're going to do things, right? There are different ways of doing it. You can play man for man. You can play a zonal defense. You can play a mix of zonal and man for man. You can say, okay, like an awful lot of teams, you can watch the games here, an awful lot of teams are playing five at the back, right? But they're
Mm.
playing very, very compact in the middle because they
Yeah.
don't want any play in the middle. And
Yeah.
they're leaving the wings go, right? That's
Yeah.
fine if you're going to do that. But how do you shift them? Because you can't just stay in your sort of your five straight line in the middle. You have to move that line. When do you move
Yeah.
that line? Who goes out? Who's responsible for taking the ball when it gets to the wing? That kind of thing, right? And those decisions, we're talking about those things now for the last 15 seconds. Those decisions have to be made in an instant, right?
Yeah.
And players not doing that, that is literally all that an international player needs at this level is if you doubt what you're doing for 1 second, they're gone and that's over.
Yeah.
And now you're into a completely different type of defending where the ball is behind you, the Dutch are putting across the goal and it's in the back of your net, right? And that's the difference for me there. And that's what Potter hasn't really, like, I think in principle, on an intellectual level, they know what they need. He needs them to do, but I don't think that in the heat of battle, they don't seem to be able to transfer one into the other, so to speak.
Yeah, okay. So, like, what are your predictions about the game against Japan? I do have a feeling that Japan are going to muller them. I just have this sense that they're going to get hammered by Japan, but I don't know. What do you feel?
Yeah, no, I think it's one of those days where absolutely anything could happen, And I think Potter's talked a little bit about not wanting to make changes for the sake of making changes, and that Alanga has been very good off the bench, and he has. I know Alanga's like champing at the bit to get out there. He's desperate to start a
Mhm.
game. That kid has an enormous belief in himself, and rightly so. He's a tremendous footballer. Lucas Bergvall from Tottenham Hotspur is another player that they could probably do within there because Lucas has an ability. He has a tremendous touch on the ball. He's also very good defensively, but he has a longer range and a better range of passing, I think, than some of the midfielders that are in there. Yassin Ayari has been tremendous, got two
Yeah.
goals in the first game against Tunisia. But I think he's kind of, been taking on shots where he should be passing and passing where he should be shooting. And again, that
Mm.
comes down to decision making in the heat of battle. I do think that Potter should stir it up a little bit. Maybe not start Alanga, but definitely start Barival because Barival is the kind of player who he's on the same sort of level of intelligence as what the Japanese midfield is. The Japanese midfield
Mm.
is very, very clever. And if you want to talk about a team, they've had the same coach now for 5 or 6 years. If you want to talk about a team that knows exactly what their coach wants them to do in any given situation, that at this tournament for me is Japan. And these guys do it. They just go out and they do exactly what they're asked to do, and they're very, very good at it. And Japan are one of those teams who should never lose to a team below them, but will often lose to teams above them. But they've gotten great results. I think they beat Brazil recently. I think they beat England as well.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a very good team. On paper, they should absolutely murder a Sweden side that doesn't really have, that sort of same level of stability. But again, you never know. Sweden score in the first 10 minutes, they could go nuts altogether.
Yeah. I think like I think that Ayari's shots, like his like shooting from range is a very good weapon, I would say, especially, just to pull the backline out to like as a surprise element. Like sometimes it will go over, and he was trying a lot of the shots, especially in the Netherlands game. He was a little bit high on his supply, so to speak, after the Tunisia game, I would say. But I think that is a very good weapon to have, especially with that howitzer of a right foot that he has. Like really, the ball striking from him, like it's too good, I feel.
Yeah. And then with the two strikers that he has in front of him, and Alexander Isak and Victor Gyökeres as well, exactly as you say that if you pull the back line up, right, say you take a shot and the back line goes, okay, we have to keep him honest, we have to push out. That
Yeah,
opens up then for a little slide pass into one of the channels there for Isak or Gyökeres, which can end up being a very, very easy chance if it's weighted properly. And
yeah,
that's the kind of thing where if I was Ayari after the first game, I'd be saying, okay, I've scored my goals now, that's great. Let me see if I can contribute in this way as well. Because Gyökeres and Isak both scored, I think, in the first game against Tunisia. If you can get those guys, a goal a couple of games in a row, once their confidence grows, they can be very, very difficult to stop. And Gyökeres showed that in the playoff against Poland when he scored late to get Sweden into the World Cup. I think that's where when I talk about the range of passing for Bayval is capable of doing those two things as well, left foot and right foot. So I think that's definitely something they should be looking at. But I think then there's the tendency as well to just say, okay, let's just sit back and be compact and make sure the other team doesn't score against us because a point would be enough for Sweden to make the next round.
yeah. Okay, now on to the other side of Scandinavia, to Norway, and I think it's safe to say I've been very impressed with how they've approached these first two games. Like honestly speaking, like the first game against Iraq, they took care of business. Little bit of a tricky game actually. Like your first World Cup after a while, you can be a little bit driven by your emotions, and you wouldn't, I mean, I'm going to blame them, but you are highly fancy to win that game as well, and they took care of that. And they also, I mean, I would say Senegal have been let down by the old heads, so to speak. But even then, also they did get a professional win over there. I'm very excited to see how they do against France. What about you?
I was looking forward to that France game for months and months and months, and now I'm not even sure that I'll watch it because both teams are through, and both teams are
Uh,
just, okay, whoever wins the group. Neither team, I don't think, cares who wins the group. So I
hmm,
would expect them to rest a bunch of players. Matt Odegaard in particular, the captain from Arsenal, he looked really tired to me at the end of the Senegal game,
hmm,
and he was sort of criticised after the Iraq game because he played and he did okay, but he wasn't great. And for some reason, Norwegian people put an enormous amount of pressure on him to be the creator of all things. And if he has one off game whatsoever, they get stuck into him, which is nonsensical. Like every player can have a day. Sometimes the tactics of a game don't suit you and the ball just passes you by. I've seen the great Christian Eriksen for Denmark. Once or twice, you will see a team that says, okay, whatever happens, don't play the ball in the part of the park where he is, kind of thing. And that was kind of what Iraq did against Odegaard. It was a lot of the time you'll hear a player hear of a player being anonymous in a game, right? And that's not because they didn't go looking for the ball. It's because they were so tightly marked that their own teammates, particularly defenders, didn't want to pass the ball to them. And that was how Odegaard was sort of kept quiet in that Iraq match. Much better, I thought, against Senegal. Got on the ball much better, was much more threatening, had an assist, I think. And then Patrick Bay came off the bench from Buda Glimt, had the assist for Holland's third goal, his second goal and Norway's third, which they needed. I think they look really, really good, Norway. I do think that they have a little bit of a soft centre. They've conceded in both their matches now. 3 goals in 2 games they conceded. That may change now because I'd say that Stola Solbakken now is going to probably put in Leo Østegård, who scored against Iraq. He'll probably put him in from the start now because one of the guys got injured. Julian Ryerson got injured. So you might get Østegård in that. And Østegård is a good old fashioned, if people have been watching English or British football for a long time, Østegård is that kind of centre back. And I really think that Norway need that kind of guy. There's a guy called Stefan Strandberg who's like he retired a couple of years ago. He was the same. You wouldn't sort of pick him out and say, okay, this guy's going to go to the Premier League or the Bundesliga or whatever. Did play a little bit in Germany, but you need that kind of guy who can dominate. Your air traffic controller who can go in there and dominate in that. And Østegård, I think, would give them a different sense of calm at the back, knowing because he's a lovely guy, but he's also mad as a box of frogs. This guy would just go in there and get stuck into everything. And I think that's what's lacking because we've gone to a position in football now where everybody wants to be Rio Ferdinand. They want to be this tall, graceful player on the ball. No. Your job is to stop the other team from scoring, right? All the other fancy stuff and passing the ball with your left foot and right foot, that's all great, pal. I'm delighted for you. I'm delighted that your academy training went well, right? Just stop them from scoring to begin with. That's what I want to see first, And that's what Østegård gives you. And I think that Solbakken, now obviously I'm not on the training ground every day with Norway, but I've been around them long enough to know that Østegård will give them what I think they're lacking at the moment, which is that steel at the centre of defence. But Holland, he's just an incredible player. I mean, his finishes, and then of course he hit the post as well with that tight angle shot at the end of the first half. He's just a phenomenon. And the way they play football, it's so simple, Ashish. It's so simple. It's like, okay, let's get the ball, let's break as fast as we can. And they'll throw 4 or 5 men forward, and then all of a sudden, it doesn't matter who they throw forward. They just affect space because we know Holland's getting the ball at the end of the day anyway. But what a finisher. Like the finish he put together from Patrick Bay's ball into the box. So Bay gets the ball down the left channel, and he just played a little sort of a dinked ball around about waist height. And Ellen sort of jumped up and steered it into the ball, into the back of the net with his right foot. And I could go back and watch that goal 100 times because it's so technically perfectly executed. You couldn't do that with your right and left foot. You couldn't dive and head. You couldn't do anything. It was a really bad ball for Patrick. And I like the kid, but he scored a brilliant goal from it, So, and as long as he's capable of doing things like that, Norway are not out of any game.
Yeah, I think they do have what it takes. I think they potentially could reach a quarters, and depending on the draw as well. I mean, I'm not going to go as far as to say a semi, but you never know with this tournament, especially with how fluid the brackets and all are falling. It could very well turn out in their favor. Okay, so yeah, now we move on to a little bit of the undiscovered side of the World Cup, so to speak. I want you to name which country you've enjoyed watching. So this is a non-mainstream country. None of the contenders are count over here. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Which has been your favorite country to watch?
Yeah, I'm going to have to say Cape Verde for that one, Ashish. And I'm going to have to admit as well that I haven't seen all their games or every second of their games because, one of the things about being at the World Cup is that you don't actually see all of it. There's a famous Irish journalist, Con Houlihan, who once said about Italia 90, which is the first time that Ireland competed at the World Cup. He said, I missed Italia 90 because I was there, And it often happens that you're traveling, we would have, now when there's 3 games a day, we might be traveling to a press conference or traveling to a game, and there's another game going on at the same time. And then you'd be writing your story out while the second game is going on. And when you have it on the screens in the background, that kind of thing, you can't just sit down and watch it. But Cape Verde have had some tremendous results. Their story of how they got there is actually an Irish player in the team, Roberto Pico Lopez. And he's a fantastic guy, great centre back. He's like Østegård. He's the kind of player who just goes in there and cleans up everything. He's like, okay, lads, I'll take care of this. You go score the goals, kind of thing. And he was contacted via LinkedIn, and he never replied. It took him 9 months to reply because they contacted him in Portuguese, and he thought it was just some spam thing. I spoke to him before the World Cup. It was amazing, And then they got back onto him again, and they said, "Have you had time to think about our proposal?" I goes, "Oh shit, I better put this through Google Translate." And that's just how he became football.
I think
now the guy is a great player as well, but
yeah, I think the World Cup is about such stories as well, right? You get to know these niche facts and stories which come up as well, and I think that's the beauty of the World Cup, I would say, right?
Yeah, And I think as well that, the fact that countries like that come here, and the 2018 World Cup is not something I'm a big fan of. I thought 32 was probably enough. I think 24 is perfect because there's too many teams here that I don't really think are there yet. Okay. But when Pico started playing for Cape Verde in 2019, they have done very, very well in the African Cup of Nations since then. They have shown a progression that has led to this World Cup and the good results, including a draw against Spain. That was well deserved. Okay. I know Spain had a lot of chances and that kind of thing. But if you look at how modern teams defend, we spoke earlier on about this thing of playing five at the back, very tight, not allowing the space on the wings and just getting on with it. And that's something that, these teams have done very well and they've implemented it very well. So we have to give them credit for that. The teams who sort of come here and don't really have a whole lot to offer, and there has been a few of them. I'm not going to point any of them out now because I don't want your YouTube comments get filled with haters. You know, but aren't as far along in their development as a Cape Verde, maybe. Qatar have shown us that they have developed in the last World Cup and they didn't do very well on home soil, but now they've shown a little bit of a difference there. Certainly in the first game, they did okay there. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking for. And to have a team like that, because let's also remember that the kind of players who would have been eligible, because Cape Verde used to be a Portuguese colony, some of the people who would have been available to Cape Verde had they chose to do so. Henrik Larsson, the great Celtic, Barcelona, and Sweden
Yeah.
striker. A certain Cristiano Ronaldo, you may have heard of him. He was eligible to play for Cape Verde as well, And they don't have those kinds of players, but they have some very, very good individuals. And they have their own football culture as well, which is not entirely Portuguese, but Portuguese influence. And that to me is the fascinating part of the World Cup, is to see these teams up close and then to see them perform so well and perform like they were great. They let the Reuters team, like my colleagues down in Miami, I think it was, in to talk to the team, and they were really open about it, that kind of thing. And they're the stories of the World Cup for me. So, if at any point I have to start cheering for a team here, it'll probably be them.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you mentioned that point, like when you go to the World Cup, you can't really watch it because you're traveling all the thing. Makes you, makes one respect the work rate of a certain Gianni Infantino who's just there all over the place, makes it to a couple of games a day, like I respect the work rate of
Well,
Gianni.
well, in fairness to Gianni, if I had a private jet too, I might get to see more football than what I'm seeing.
Yeah, man. Like it's led to the doubles theory, which is going around on the internet. Like he has multiple doubles showing up at all these games. So
Oh
yeah.
God, no! One of him is enough for me.
Okay, now I think let's end the episode with this. So at the end of the last episode, or outside the recording, you did mention you had to go. You had another commitment for Reuters, and it was to do with how the World Cup in Canada has affected businesses. And I don't know if you can give a little more context with regard to that, and I'll definitely put a link as well in the description. That would be
Yeah,
really lovely
sure. So part of
because
being
our
at the World
podcast
Cup
is
is
also about stories, is that as well.
Yeah. So part of being at the World Cup is all these stories around things about soccer communities, expatriate communities, business communities, local communities. So we try to get out and tell those stories as well. And when your city or your country becomes the host for a World Cup, you think, oh, great, bonanza. Loads of people are going to make lots of money out of this. And of course, there are bars and restaurants here, and there are signs up and all World Cup specials and happy hours and come watch the game on our big screen. But there's also a huge amount of effect on the rest of the population at large that people don't think of, right? The streets have been closed in downtown Vancouver for weeks, right? And the guys who own the stores on those streets, like we were in one aquarium, which is right beside the BC Play Stadium, and those guys have to close on match days because there's so many streets closed around them that people buying stuff for their fish or their reptiles, that kind of thing, they're just not going to go into town that day. And they
Mm.
realized that, okay, there's no point. It costs us money to have the store closed, but it also costs us even more money in terms of staff salaries and that kind of thing to have the place open. So they've had to close. We've had FIFA threatening distributors of certain things. And FIFA is very careful of its trademarks. So anything that
Mm.
mentions FIFA World Cup, you can't create anything like that at all, or you'll be getting cease and desist letters from FIFA. So there was one woman, she owned a pet shop, and she got in these plushies, like these bears, soft bears. And she didn't know anything about soccer. She doesn't know anything. She's not a sports fan at all. And she put them up on our website. And I think all she said was get them in time. They call it FIFA here, meaning the FIFA World Cup.
Yeah.
And she said, "I'll get your bears in time for FIFA." And of course, the bears were in the colours of Italy and England and Germany and
Yeah.
Spain and that kind of thing. And the next thing, once you put it up on the website, the distributor got on and went, okay, you have to take that down now because FIFA is going to sue all of us if you say
Mm.
that this is related in any way to FIFA, you know? So she had to do that. Now, she ended up giving those toys to a shelter for homeless dogs, right? And she just said, I don't want this. I don't want the hassle. I don't want the profits. I don't want anything to do with it, you know? And by the same token, there's a man called Kingsley who was born in Wolverhampton to a Jamaican family who moved to Canada here when he was 5 years old. And he runs a souvenir shop quite close to the BC Place. And he has some of the FIFA merchandise, but he also has his own stuff. So he wants to create something that there would be a slightly bigger profit margin on because I'm not sure people know that FIFA control everything in the stadium, all the food and drinks and concessions and souvenirs. And all of that is controlled by FIFA during the World Cup. Like, so it doesn't go to the stadiums or a local organizing committee. All of that is part of what goes to FIFA. So Kingsley wanted to create something in his store and he creates a fridge magnet. But he had to get like designers and legal people to look at this and say, okay,
Mm.
is this impinging on the FIFA 2026 rights or whatever? So it's an interesting story. And the most important part is actually these are just business people. These are not they're not huge corporations like a Coca-Cola or a McDonald's. They're not
Yeah.
looking to sponsor something like this. They're just looking to make a few dollars from tourists here. And Kingsley found a way. But the woman who owned the pet shop, her name is Dawn. She didn't, and she just left it. And it's kind of left a bitter taste in her mouth because at the end of the day, this is the people's game, right? Now, I understand intellectual property and broadcast rights and all these kinds of things, right? But without fans, football is nothing, right? And who are fans? Fans are people who coach teams and are people who own souvenir stores and pet stores and who give their time to the community, that kind of thing as well. So I think we really need to have a discussion at some point about how controlling FIFA can be when it comes to the World Cup, because the World Cup is not just for FIFA, it's not just for soccer, especially when you're holding a city like Vancouver, it's for everybody.
Yeah, I think FIFA, okay, like FIFA has this thing, they are a not-for-profit organization which does a lot of stuff for profit. So like there is that duality, so to speak, of how they operate as well. Like, in terms of I don't know, a little bit more of the mainstream stuff is what happened with the Levi's Stadium, like where they just had to cover the Levi's, and
Yep.
I mean Levi's took advantage of it, of course, because they have a lot of clever people in charge over there, and a lot of stuff to do with the staffers over there. They had to ask them to mask the taping, like they were wearing Nike sneakers and they had to mask the taping on that. And I think it's bordering on a little bit on paranoia. Like I'm not a legal expert. There may be a lot of clauses in place and they have to abide by certain uh strictures within the contract. But I don't know. After a point, it just gets excessive, I guess.
Yeah.
Like
Well, it is. They have what they call a clean stadium policy, which means that
correct,
no logos from non-sponsors should be seen in the stadium, and
correct.
especially if they're related to anything. So if you have Coca-Cola, your drink sponsor, and Pepsi want to put something up in there, that's a no-no. That has to be covered up.
Yeah,
And that exclusivity is what gives those rights their value. That's why
correct.
Coca-Cola pays $1 billion or whoever, and that's great and all that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, I would rather and in a stadium maybe that's okay. I don't know, but when it comes to selling stuff like outside, it's souvenir stores, tourist stores, hotels, this kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
because another aspect of it is the hotel workers here in Vancouver are not getting paid any extra during the World Cup. The rooms cost a whole lot more, but nobody the
It's not
fees.
filtering down. Yeah, I think that's about it. I don't want to take more of your time as well, Philippe. And yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks. Hopefully we'll be back with more stories in our next episode. Like I think we'll probably be doing the next one after. Let's do it after the round of 32 game. I think which involves Switzerland. I
Yep,
think that would be the best time to do
yep,
it in terms of like a lot of
super.
more stories as well. And of course, we can put speak about a lot more pieces which are doing for Reuters as well, because it gives a lot more context about what is actually going on, and that would be lovely. And
Brilliant.
yeah, let's wind up by saying thanks for everyone watching this episode, and please like and subscribe. And yeah, thank you, Philip, again for coming again.
My pleasure, Ashley. Take care.
Yeah. Yeah.